Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are continuing journal collection number 38. We are up to July 10th of the year 1847, and with that said, I'll read the entry for that date. July 10th. Ellery Channing has written a lively book on Rome, which certifies that he has been there. He has the reputation of being a man of genius, and this is some guarantee of it. He has approached sometimes the lightness and pungency of his talk, but not often. He has used his own eyes, and many things are brought to notice here that had not been reported, as fountains, the gardens, lively charcoal sketches of the cafe, the trattoria, and the bacon dealer's shop, the vetera and postilion, the agriculture in Campania. It was a lucky thought to introduce Montaigne in Rome, and the tribute to Raphael over his tomb in the Pantheon and to Michelangelo are warm and discerning, a very Catholic spirit. Thoreau sometimes appears only as a gendarme, good to knock down a cockney with, but without that power to cheer and establish which makes the value of a friend. Goethe, in this third volume autobiography, which I read now in new translation, seems to know altogether too much about himself. Luther, according to Mr. Blecker, advises in one of his letters a young scholar who cannot get rid of his doubts and spiritual fears to get drunk. Edda. Quote, "The gods have erected a bridge from earth to heaven which is called Bifrost or Rainbow." End quote. I also find it significant what is said of Thor's house, that, quote, "it has 540 floors." End quote. Poet. Significant again that, quote, "Balder the Good dreamed dreams great and perilous for his life, but he told the Asa the dreams." End quote. So the whole fable of Balder's slaying. Conversation that would verily interest me would be those old conundrums which at symposia the 7 or 70 wise masters were wont to crack. What is intellect? What is time? What are the runners and what the goals? But now there is no possibility of treating them well. Conversation on intellect and scholars becomes pathology. What a society it needs! I think you could not find a club at once acute and liberal enough in the world. Bring the best wits together, and they are so impatient of each other, so worldly or so babyish, there is so much more than their wit, so many follies and gluttonies and partialities, so much age and sleep and care, that you have no academy. The questions that I incessantly ask myself, as, "What is our mythology?" which were a sort of test object for the power of our lenses, never come into my mind when I meet with clergymen. And what academy has propounded this for a prize? But of what use to bring the men together when they will torment and tyrannize over each other, and play the merchant and the statesman? Conversation in society is always on a platform so low as to exclude the saint and the poet after they have made a few trials. Ah, we must have some gift of transcending time, also, as we do space, and collecting our club from a wider brotherhood. Cryer calls Pythagoras, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Proclus, Plotinus, Spinoza, Confucius, and Menu, Kepler, Fryer, Bacon. Insufficient forces. We have experience reading, relatedness enough, oh yes, and every other weapon, if only we had constitution enough. But as the doctor said in my boyhood, quote, "You have no stamina." End quote. Cyrus Stowe wanted his bog meadow brought into grass. He offered Anthony Colomb, Saul Weatherby, and whoever else seed and manure and team, and the whole crop which they accepted and went to work and reduced the tough roots, the tussocks of grass, the uneven surface, and gave the whole field a good rodding and breaking and stunning, and now Stowe finds no longer any difficulty in getting good English grass from the smooth and friable land. What Stowe does with his field, what the Creator does with the planet, the Yankees are now doing with America. It will be friable, arable, habitable to men and angels yet. As a side note to the listener at the moment, those poppings you occasionally hear in the background are the radiators heating up and cooling down, and the fuel or whatever going in and out. I can't have any control over that part, and if I stopped every time and tried to go over every time I heard a pop, there's another one. I would it would take a long time. So hopefully you can ignore it, and I will attempt to ignore it without succumbing to the temptation of trying to edit every single one of those out. Anyway, back to the journals. Tools, mechanic powers. Shall a man see wheels every day of his life on every cart, car, and loom, and not learn the value of manners, as wheels are currency to himself? Shall he in his garden cut down the spindling shoots of his pear tree, or pinch off the redundant buds of his grapevine to give robustness to the stock, and not learn the value of rejection in his own spiritual economy? Shall he see that all his gardening is a selection, and then a new and then a newer selection, and not apply that lesson to his life? Or shall he see in chemistry that law of superinducing and contagion, mentioned above, and not see that Plato platonizes and Napoleon Napoleonizes men, that a merchant sets everybody on edge for stocks? Spurzheim fills America with plaster skulls, and Agassiz makes anatomist where he goes. Bodies only act when freed, is the quotation below it. Thursday, July 15th. Alcott, Thoreau, and I went to the quote-unquote island in the Walden woodlot and cut down and brought home 20 hemlocks for posts of the arbor, and these have been growing when I was sleeping, fenced, bought, and owned by other men, and now in this new want of mine for an ornament to my grounds, their care and the long contribution of the great agents, sun and earth, rain and frost, supply this rich botanic wonder of our isle. A rather aristocratic book is the history of Cid, Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar, born A.D. 1026, Southey's Chronicle. Quote, "My Cid, my fortunate he who never was conquered, he of good fortune, my Cid Ruy Diaz, he who in a happy hour first girt on his sword." End quote. The horse Bavieca, like Curuglu's horse, Curat, is the sub-god in the poem, and then the swords Colada and Tizona, like Arthur's Excalibur. Books. O day of days when we can read! The reader and the book, either without the other, is not. July 24th. Pear trees this morning in high prosperity. Hardly a tough, dry, wormy dwarf in all the garden but is forced to show a bud or a shoot today. Flemish beauty, meanwhile, and the golden Bure of Bilboa, and the green princesses who keep their incognito so well near the plum trees, show a foot and a half of growth, respectively. The Divine Man. Alexander the Great emitted from his skin a sweet odor, and Henry More believed the same thing of himself, and who does not remember the south wind days when he was a boy, when his own hand had a strawberry scent? July 25th. Of Alcott it is plain to see that he never loses sight of the order of things and thoughts before him. The thought he would record is something, but the place, the page, the book in which it is to be written are something also, not less than the proposition. So that usually in the attention to the marshalling, the thing marshalled dwindles and disappears. One thing more, I used to tell him that he had no senses, and it is true that they are with him merely vehicular, and do not constitute a pleasure and a temptation of themselves. We had a good proof of it this morning. He wanted to know, quote, why the boys waded in the water after pond lilies, end quote. Why, because they will sell in town for a cent apiece, and every man and child likes to carry one to church for a cologne bottle. What, said he, have they a perfume? I did not know it. See also the account of Chaucer's Canon. In Gorgias, Callicles, quote, "Tell me, Socrates, whether we must say that you are now in earnest or in jest. For if you are in earnest, and these things which you say are true, Is not our human life subverted, and are not all our actions, as it seems, contrary to what they ought to be? End quote. See also the diatribe against philosophers in Gorgias. The distinction between speculative and practical seemed to me much as if we should have champions appointed to tilt for the superiority respectively of each of the four elements, except insofar as it covers the difference between seeming and reality. In this world of dreamers it makes small difference whether the men devote themselves to nouns or to laying stone walls, but whether they do it honestly or for show. In the neighborhood of the new railroad the other day in Westminster, I found two poor English or Irishmen playing checkers on a little board where the spots were marked with ink, and the men were beans and coffee berries. They played on, game after game, one sure of beating the other indignant at defeat, and I left them playing. Why not? And what difference? All the world is playing backgammon, some with beans and coffee, and some with Texas and Mexico, with states and nations. Eyes outrun the feet, and go where the feet and hands can never follow. So Plato, the practicalists. Compensation. In the essay should have been adduced the fable of Faust as the contribution of Christian mythology to the dogma, and Balder's blessing by Frigga from all harms but the mistletoe, and the eye left in pledge by the alphadeer when he drank of Mimir's spring. The wolf Fenris is not chained except at the expense of the hand of Tyre. Beattie is an example of successful poetic expression. What can be finer than, quote, "See in the rear of the warm summer shower the visionary boy for shelter fly," end quote. Aristocracy. But the day is darkened when the golden river runs down into mud. There is no individual trait that will not, with a little self-indulgence, grow to a fanaticism as the artistic or the stoical humor, and then the beauty is deformity, and our delightful image of grace and friendship is a mournful chasm, henceforth a subject of tedious explanation. Concord River in July 25th and August 2nd is decorated with the nymphea, the cardinal flower, and the buttonbush, Asclepias and eupatoriums. Especially the willow adorns it with a sort of green smoke. At Cambridge, the succory. Aristocracy. The astronomers are eager to know whether the moon has an atmosphere. Cambridge telescope seems to think it has. I am only concerned that every man have one. The highest value of natural history, and mainly of the new and secular results, like the inferences from geology and the discovery of parallax and the resolution of nebulae, is its translation into a universal cipher applicable to man viewed as intellect also. All the languages should be studied abreast, says Catsier. Learn the laws of music, said Fourier, and I can tell you any secret in any part of the universe. In anatomy, for instance, or in astronomy, Kepler thought as much before. Ah, that is what interests me when I read a true history, what befalls in that kingdom where 1,000 years is one day, and see that it is true through all the sciences and the laws of thought as well as of chemistry. No Marseillaise is sung in that high region. Whip for our top. The young scholar buys an alarm clock, he invents a clepsydron, he plants a dial in his garden, he reads Greek by candlelight before breakfast. When this fury is first over, he tries traveling with book and pen, and relishes his Greek poet in country bar-rooms, or in sea beaches, and lighthouses, or in a cabin in the woods. Later, a public occasion, an expecting audience, or the pride of printing a book flagellate the drowsy muse. Theatre des Varietés. There are many mansions in my father's house. Poetry is one, gardening is one, chemistry is one, geology is one, engineering is one. They are all intertranslatable language. Metamorphosis. The interest of the gardener and the pomologist has the same foundation as that of the poet. namely in the metamorphosis. These also behold the miracle, the guided change, the change conspicuous, the guide invisible. A bare stick studs itself over with green buds, which become again leaves, flowers, and at length delicious fruit. Though dwarfs build Skidbladnir, as soon as its sails are unfurled, a favorable gale arises and carries it of itself to whatever place it is destined. It will hold them all with their war gear on, and when they have no mind to sail, they can fold it up like a cloth in their pocket. Editor's note. The new journal, called the Massachusetts Quarterly Review, considered at meetings in the spring and especially urged by Theodore Parker and Dr. S. G. Howe, had been now decided on with the former as editor. Mr. Emerson refused to be an associate editor, but consented to write the initial address to the public. The following paragraph is, in substance, in that address, but is so much more local in expression that it is here given. See Miscellanies, pages 383 and 384. End note. I read the fabulous magnificence of these Karans and Jamshids and Kaikans and Friruduns of Persia, all gold and talismans. Then I walk by the newsboys with telegraph dispatches, by the post office, and petting shop with English steamers' journals, and past the main depot, and take my own seat in the Fichtberg cars, and see every man dropped at his estate as we pass it, and see what tens of thousands of powerful and armed men, science-armed, society-armed men, sit at large in this ample land of ours, obscure from their numbers and the extent of territory, and muse on the power which each of these can lay hold of at pleasure. These men who wear no star nor gold-laced hat, you cannot tell if they be poor or rich, and I think how far these chains of intercourse and travel go, what levers, what pumps, what searchings are applied to nature for the benefit of the youngest of these exorbitant republicans, and I say, what a negrifying royalty is that of Jamshid and Solomon? What a real sovereignty of nature does the Bostonian possess? Caoutchouc, steam, ether, telegraph, what bells they can ring. Value of a servant. The New Englander is attentive to trifles, values himself on a sort of omniscience, knows when the cars start at every depot, feels every water pipe and furnace flue in his house, knows where the rafters are in the wall. How can he be absorbed in his thought? How can he be contemplative? He must have a servant. He must call Tom to ask prices and hours, what day of the month it is, and when the mail closes. Who is governor of the state, and where is the police office? But Tom does not come at a call. Nothing is so rare in New England as Tom. Bad for the New Englander. His skin is ocular. He is afflicted with a second thought. Not for an instant can he be great and abandoned to a sentiment. Let the countryman beware of cities. A city is the paradise of trifles, and the current sets so strong that way that city seems a hotel and a shop, a gigantic clothes mart, toy shop, and if one perchance meet in the street a man of probity and wisdom, an accomplished and domestic soul, we are taken by surprise, and he drives the owls and bats that had infested us home to their holes again. Aristocracy. What is it that makes noblemen? Loyalty to his thought. Boston divides itself into factions on Dr. Jackson's discovery of ether, and London and Paris contest the priority of having found Neptune in the skies. It is not that Dr. Jackson or Mr. Morton, that Leverrier or Mr. Adams will be in the least enlarged or ameliorated by conceding to them the coveted priority, but there is evidently a feeling of an awful power in this creative saliency, this saliency of thought, this habit of saliency, of not pausing but going on, which is a sort of importation and domestication of the divine effort in a man. Originality. I heard old John Keyes say, quote, that it was a story, that of importing the stone of the stone chapel, which he had told so often that he now firmly believed it himself. So is it, no doubt, with many of my originalities. I have a good many commonplaces which often turn up in my writing and talking, which I have used so often that I have the right of the strong hand unto, but that they are indigenous in my brain I do not know or care. The superstitions of our age. The fear of Catholicism, the fear of pauperism, the fear of immigration, the fear of manufacturing interests, the fear of radicalism or democracy, and faith in the steam engine. Nemesis takes care of all these things, balances fear with fear, eradicates nobles by upstarts, supplants one set of nobodies by new nobodies. I am always reminded, and now again by reading last night in Rousseau's Confessions, that it is not the events in one's life, but in the faculty of selecting and reporting them, that the interest lies. Mrs. Marshall over the way, if she could write, would make as interesting a life as Robinson Crusoe, and this because poetry needs little history. It is made of 1 part history and 99 parts music, or, shall I say, fact and affection. Quote, "This machine," said my friend, "must be far from perfect. See how complex it is." The highest simplicity of structure is the last and requires the most composite. In England, Landor, De Quincey, Carlyle, 3 men of original literary genius, but the scholar, the Catholic, cosmic intellect, Bacon's own son, the Lord Chief Justice on the Muses' bench, is Wilkinson. Education should leave the child obscure in his youth, protected so as the green apple in its crude state. Life consists in what a man is thinking of all day. If a man read a book because it interests him, and read in all directions for the same reason, his reading is pure and interests me. But if he read with ulterior objects, if he reads that he may write, we do not impute it to him for righteousness. In the first case, he is like one who takes up only so much land as he uses. In the second, he buys land to speculate with. I have that faith in the necessity of all gifts that to employ writers to be a little more of this or that were like advising gunpowder to explode gently, or snow to temper its whiteness, or oak trees to be less profuse in leaves and acorns, or poplars to try vinous habits and creep on walls. They do as they can, and they must instruct you equally by their failure as by their talent. That is, they must teach you that the world is farmed out to many contractors, and each arranges all things on his petty task, sacrifices all for that. Aristocracy may study Hamlet. It is the literature and manual of that. Aristocracy is the moral and independent class. Polk and Webster must have power and must truckle for it. With patrician airs they can never be gentlemen. We understand very well what they mean when they say patriotism, and unless we are very tired we do not laugh. The prerogatives of the teacher are determined, as one of my friends said, not by his profession, but by the health he restores to the body and mind of his patient, and the faith he ensures by actual cure. Wealth. The difference between riches and poverty, as I so often say, is reverence for superiority. It makes not much difference what kind that is, but health requires the upward eye. He is beautiful in face, in port, in manners, who is loyal to his thought, absorbed in objects which he thinks superior to himself. Henry Thoreau says that 12 pounds of Indian meal, which one can easily carry on his back, will be food for a fortnight. Of course, one need not be in want of a living wherever corn grows, and where it does not, rice is as good. Henry, when you talked of art, blotted a paper with ink, then doubled it over, and safely defied the artist to surpass his effect. Charles K. Newcomb, the fathomless skeptic, was here August 8th. Thought he defies, he thinks it noxious. It makes us old, harried, anxious. Yes, but it is no more to be declined than hands and feet are. We must accept our functions as well as our organs. Thought is like the weather, or birth, or death. We must take it as it comes. Then this is work which, like every work, reacts powerfully on the workman. Out of this anxiety flows a celestial serenity. Aristocracy. One more word for a real aristocracy, that, namely, in which each member contributes something real. Every member commits himself, imparts without reserve the last results of intellect, because he is to receive an equivalent in virtue, in genius, in talent, from each other member. None shall join us but on that condition. No idler, no mocker, no counterfeiter, no critic, no frivolous person whatsoever can remain in this company. I propose this law with confidence, because I believe every substantial man has somewhat to contribute. I talked with Mr. W. of Alcott. W. said he is impracticable. I said, yes, as our thoughts are. He said, I do not think it will do to say that our thoughts are quite impracticable. I replied, nor do I think that any man is quite impracticable, nor do I feel at liberty to decline the thoughts or the men that go by, because they are not quite easy to deal with and comfortable to the opinions of the Boston Post. Hamlet was prophecy. Quote, nothing is more indicative of the deepest culture and refinement than a tender consideration of the ignorant, said my friend A. Yes, and what is agreeable in it is the wealth of nature it indicates. Enough has he and to spare. Individualism has never been tried. All history, all poetry deal with it only, and because now it was in the minds of men to go alone, and now before it was tried, now, when a few begin to think of the celestial enterprise, sounds the tin trumpet of a French phalanstery, and the newsboys throw up their caps and cry, egotism is exploded, now for communism. But all that is valuable in the phalanstery comes of individualism. You may settle it in your hearts that when you get a great man, he will be hard to keep step with. Spoons and skimmers may well enough lie together, but vases and statues must have each its own pedestal. Laws of the world. The fish in the cave is blind. Such is the eternal relation between power and use. The fable of Zohac, of whom Eblis asked as the reward of his services that he might kiss the king's naked shoulder, and from the touch sprang two black serpents, who were fed daily with human victims, it is easy to see how fast a figurative description of luxury becomes a legend. The peasant sees that a pound of meal is a day's food, and costs a penny, but that the courtier drinks a cup of wine or eats a fowl which costs 50 or 100 prices of his day's provisions, nay, which costs the wages of a man for 10 days. Of course 10 men must toil all day, that this trifler may dine at ease. When this is much exaggerated, he says, the children of the courtier are corrupted from the mother's womb. If their father ate up 10 men, they 20, and with wrath and contempt beside. 2 snakes have sprung from his shoulder who feed on human brains. Realism, idealism. Quote, we have no land to put our words on, yet our words are true, said my Sacs and Ioways. The philosopher may say the same. Every agent is a regent. What are governments but awkward scaffoldings by which the noble temple of individual genius is reared? In Greece, one must see that the facility of intercourse, arising out of peculiar geography, combined with the absence of a massive priesthood and the discussion of all political business in the open air by all persons, gave that opportunity, that "easy state of transmission," that "state of amelioration," which the seedling pair of Van Mons requires, so essential to the best genius. If the spark were struck out, it would be fanned to flame. Memorandum, August 24th. M. Alexander Vadamer brings me compliments, etc., from M. Revesson, and then there is a French phrase here untranslated, to which address I am to send copies of 2 books. Boston. Quote, the arrivals at the port of Boston on Saturday, last 21st August, were 147 coastwise and 22 foreign, total 169, by far the largest number that ever came into this port on one day. In this number are not included a large number of vessels bringing wood, sand, etc., Cape packets and small craft, but such as arrive from a considerable distance and are booked at the Merchants' Exchange. Boston Daily Advertiser of Tuesday, August 24th. Editor's note: the following note added September 14th. I read in today's Post that according to the new valuation lists, Boston has increased within 1 year by the amount of 1,034 poles by $7,644,900 real and by $5,875,900 personal estate. Transition. And then there is an untranslated short Greek phrase. Intellect detaches in the most decided manner. We touch crimes, depths, mischance, and are yet safe. Also with heights, virtues, heroes, we find an interval. Intellect detaches the person. In any and every low company he is always salvable. He turns his Gyges ring and disappears from them at will. 'Tis a patent of nobility. Ali Bonaparte. We go to Europe to see aristocratic society with as few abatements as possible. We go to be Americanized, to import what we can. This country has its proper glory, though now shrouded and unknown. We will let it shine. Patriotism is balderdash. Our side, our state, our town is boyish enough. But it is true that every foot of soil has its proper quality, that the grape on either side of the same fence has its own flavor, and so every acre on the globe, every group of people, every point of climate, has its own moral meaning, whereof it is the symbol. For such a patriotism let us stand. Quote, what is a foreign country to those who have science? The fever, though it groweth in my body, is my enemy. The febrifuge, though it groweth in the distant forest, is my friend. How simple is the problem which Watts or Hyde or Combs these laborers have to solve, merely to secure a subsistence, and every part of their action in this work, cutting peat, sawing wood, mowing hay, digging potatoes, is comely and solid. Whilst they occupy themselves in this matter, they are pyramidal, a cubic solidity. The farmer, the merchant, makes nature responsible for his performance. Not so the idealist as the poet, the saint, the philosopher. They must be to a certain extent farmers and merchants, and they propose to themselves an impossible aim. The farmer has the conquest of nature to the extent of a living, practicable, the poet the conquest of the universe, impracticable. Why can we not let the broker, the grocer, the farmer be themselves, and not addle their brains with cellulism and religion? But the spiritualist needs a decided bias to the life of contemplation, else what prices he pays, poor withered Ishmaelite, Jew in his ghetto, disenfranchised odd one, what succours, what indemnities, what angels from the celestial side must come in to make him square. We wish to get the highest skill of finish, an engraver's educated finger, determination to an aim, and then to let in mania, either to take off the individual's interference and let him fly as with a thunderbolt. Hafit's characterized by a perfect intellectual emancipation, which also he provokes in the reader. Nothing stops him. He makes the dare-god and dare-devil experiment. He is not to be scared by a name or a religion. He fears nothing. He sees too far. He sees throughout. Such is the only man I wish to see and to be. The scholar's courage is as distinct as the soldier's and the statesman's, and a man who has it not cannot write for me. Reading. The culture of the imagination, how imperiously demanded, how doggedly denied. There are books which move the sea and the land, and which are the realities of which you have heard in the fables of Cornelius Agrippa and Michael Scott. Sweetness of reading, Montaigne, Froissart, Chaucer. Ancient, the three banquets, Plato, Xenophon, Plutarch. Oriental reading, not filled out. Grand reading, Plato, Cinesius, Dante, Vita Nuova, Timaeus, Weather, River of Sleep, Cudworth, Stanley. All reading, account of Madame de Staël's rule, Rabelais, Diderot, Marguerite Arritin. English reading, Clarendon, Bacon, Milton, Johnson, Northcote. Manuals, Bacon's Essays, Ben Jonson, Ford, Beaumont, and Fletcher. Favorites, Sully, Walpole, Evelyn, Walton, Burton. White's Selborne, Aubrey, Bartram's Travels, French Gaius Science, Fabelot. Tonic books, Life of Michelangelo, Gibbon, Goethe, Coleridge. Novels, Manzoni. Of translation, Mitchell. Importers, Cousin, De Staël, Southey. Go to mountains, and you may find you had better stayed at home. You cannot find your mountain, yet from your lowland window there is still the carbuncle visible again. Mountains are haunted, but they would be dull spirits indeed who could not run away from a pair of climbing, sweltering cockneys. Nathaniel L. Frothingham, 20 years ago, found me in his parlor, and looking at the form of my head, said, "If you are good, it is no thanks to you." September 5th. Channing wished we had a better word than nature to express this fine picture which the river gave us in our boat yesterday. Kind was the old word, which, however, only filled half the range of our fine Latin word. But nothing expresses that power which seems to work for beauty alone, as Channing said, whilst man works only for use. The Mecania scandens, the steel blue berries of the cornel, the eupatoriums, enriched now and then by a well-placed cardinal, adorned with fine shrubbery, with what Channing called judicious, modest colors, suited to the climate, nothing extravagant, etc. If an age that is to come would know the history of this, it will seek certainly to know what idea we attach to the word. Quote, "Give us peace in our borders," wrote Aunt Mary, and when shown the misspelling said, "It would do as it was." What is the effect of thoughts? Certainly of single thoughts, a limited and often illusory effect. But of those elemental, organic thoughts which we involuntarily express in the very mold of our features, in the tendency of our characters, there is no measure known to us. What differences the men and actions of 1847 from those of 1747? Horoscope, aristocracy. Not the phrenologist, but the philosopher may well say, "Let me see his brain, and I will tell you if he shall be poet, king, founder of cities, etc." People think it fortune that makes one rich and another poor. Is it? Yes, but the fortune was earlier in the balance or adjustment between devotion to the present good and a forecast of the good of tomorrow. G lives for the moment, praises himself for it, and despises E that he does not. G, of course, is poor, and E, since he is providing, is provided. The odd circumstance is that G thinks it a superiority in himself, this improvidence which ought to be rewarded with E's property. All biography and autobiography. I notice that the biography of each noted individual is really at last communicated by himself. The lively traits of criticism on his works are all confessions made by him from time to time among his friends and remembered and printed. Present and future. Do not imagine that I should work for the future if my services were accepted or acceptable in the present. Immortality, as you call it, is my piece à l'heure. Remarkable trait in the American character is the union, not very infrequent, of Yankee cleverness with spiritualism. Thus, my Wall Street cotton broker, Thomas Truesdell, and William Green of Boonton, New Jersey, iron manufacturer, and Rebecca Black, living by slop work from the tailors, and Samson Reed, druggist, and Herman, toy seller, and Edward Stubler, druggist in Alexandria, were all prospering people who knew how to trade and how to pray. William Green's wagon always met Thomas Truesdell and Rebecca Black at the ferry when they went, moved by the Spirit, to visit him, though he had no notice of their coming. The present. The present moment is a boat in which I embark without fear, boat and pilot at once. The modern architecture is shipbuilding, and the modern art is music, and the new power, steam. A man is measured by the angle at which he looks at objects. I am reckoned a better man than Mr. O'Shaughnessy, because I am found to see things at a larger angle than he. That is, not to be quite so much of a trifler or a fly as he. Well, here is Alcott looks at everything in larger angles than any other, and, by good right, should be the greatest man. But here comes in another trait. It is found, though the lines of his angles are of so generous contents, the apex of the angle is not quite defined, which, takes from the pith of nature the noblest attribute, This he does not understand, and puts another construction on it, that mankind are best served indirectly, the divine spark loving to insinuate itself through mediators to the minds of the multitude. He feels that he has the freest access to the minds of the people through the people's teachers, etc., etc. A tool is that which is used purely for my benefit without any regard to its own. But all love is of that nature that it instantly respects the instrument also, and though it be a ship or a wheel or a bootjack, raises it instantly into personality, and seeks to give it an interest of its own and to treat it as if it had. Good riding is a kind of skating which carries off the performer where he would not go, and is only right admirable when to all its beauty and speed a subserviency to the will, like that of walking, is added. Aristocracy. Is the ideal society always to be only a dream, a song, a luxury of thought, and never a step taken to realize the vision for living and indigent men, without misgiving within and wildest ridicule abroad? Between poetry and prose must the great gulf yawn ever, and they who try to bridge it over be lunatics or hypocrites? And yet the too dark ground of history is starred over with solitary heroes who dared to believe better of their brothers, and who prevailed by actually executing in some part the law, the high ideal in their own life, and though a hissing and an offense to their contemporaries, yet they became a celestial figure to all succeeding souls as they journeyed through nature. How shines the name of Abraham, Diogenes, Pythagoras, and the transcendent Jesus in antiquity! In our best moments, society seems not to claim equality, but requires to be treated like a child, to whom we administer chamomile and magnesia on our own judgment without consultation. What we can do is little enough for the other, and we glance for sanction at the historical positions of scholars in all ages, whom we commend in proportion to their self-reliance. But when our own light flickers in the socket, suddenly the pupil seems riper and more forward, and even assumes the mien of a patron whom we must court. Do you say that all the good retreat from men, and do not work strongly and lovingly with them? Well, it is fit and necessary that they should treat men as ghosts and phantoms, here for our behoof, here to teach us dramatically, as long as they have not attained to a real existence in their own right, that is to say, until the uprise of the soul in them. Then we shall, without tedious degrees, treat them as ourselves. They will be ourselves. Now they are not ourselves. Why should we say they are? Aristocracy. Heroic dreams taught us that the golden table never lacks members. This is the end of Part 3 of Emerson's Journal Collection number 38. dating from the year 1847, when the author was 44 years old. Thank you for listening.